With us today, as you bring us both up, we have Khary Penebaker from Wisconsin's 5th District. He is running a very tough race in a district which was the only district that was carried by John McCain in '08 and was carried by Bush before him. So, Mr. Khary Penebaker, welcome to the virgin sailing of the Project Sanity show, and thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell our audience a bit about you, how you got into politics, and what you want to do with your candidacy?
Sure. So I had spent the last 3 years roughly, advocating for common sense gun reform with Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety in America. And I had, in that capacity, had met hundreds of gun violence survivors. I mean, hundreds. And it got to the point where I'm talking to folks, asking them to march with me, whether it's here in Wisconsin or south side of Chicago. Whether hey, call your senator, call your state senator, call your federal senator, call your congresspeople. Keep at it, and asking people to be engaged and to do things. And it got to the point where I started to ask myself, how much more am I willing to ask of myself? I mean, I'm asking folks to do these things. How much more can I do? And you get to a point where you realize that you're in some ways begging a politician to do something. Mm-hmm. And after a while, it becomes pretty clear that they'll say things to you in private, and then in public they'll vote or say things completely opposite of what they just told you. Yeah. So I determined that in order for me to make the kind of change that I believe in, I wanted to become a part of the solution myself and actually become an elected official, so that I can be a part of the process of making. Bringing about common sense gun reform. So that was the impetus for me wanting to do it. I'm a father of 3. I've lived in Wisconsin the majority of my life. I got a daughter that's 17, a son that's 8, and a little one that is 3, who's got a personality that is quite amazing. But I've been politically active for the most part for a number of years now. And I'm pretty fed up with the way things have been going, and I just want to make a difference. And I believe that the positions that I stand for are such that people will come on board and help make this come about.
So what is your experience? When you walk around talking about gun legislation, what is your experience? We keep hearing about there being 75% of America is for common sense gun legislation, but the politicians, the NRA, they just keep not wanting to enact anything. Is that your experience as well?
Oh, absolutely. So right now, over 90% of America supports universal background checks. More than 80% of Republicans support universal background checks, and more than 70% of gun owners support background checks. So what that tells you is you have a broad swath of people in a bipartisan fashion who support common sense gun legislation. The problem is that you have a Congress who isn't willing to do so, or doesn't have the spine to do so, because they're afraid of the gun lobby. So when the gun lobby is able to spend obscene amounts of money and make these Congress people afraid of what they're going to do, make them afraid of some primary or something like that, they'll find any way to get out of doing something that the public is demanding that gets done. If you look at 2013, we had a good chance of the Manchin-Toomey bill, but even in that case, it wasn't, the bill by far was not perfect, but it was a good step in the right direction, but was unable to reach the number of votes that it needed to pass. And that's a function of a spineless Congress.
Okay, so what is, in your mind, what is the solution to gun control? You have the Second Amendment, you have freedom of expression, you have the free market. What is the solution that allows these things to exist alongside people being safe?
Sure. So I want to make sure that we're clear, though. There is not one solution. It's going to take a multitude of things that come together to reduce gun violence. I don't believe we're ever going to eliminate gun violence and take that 91 gun deaths per day to 0. I don't think that is a feasible thing. It's a goal to work towards, absolutely, but it's not something that's going to be. I don't think that's ever going to be achievable. Just like no other law is going to be that kind of perfect. But at the same time, the first thing we need to do is enact universal background checks. That's the most comprehensive way of reducing gun violence. There's some other things that we can do to start looking at the segments of gun violence. For example, enacting waiting periods to before you buy a gun, because that will help with crimes of passion and with suicide. So in my case, my mother committed suicide with a gun. Mm-hmm. If you place a barrier between a person who may be in the fit of rage from a crime of passion, or maybe mentally unstable, because the majority of suicides are impulsive, if you can place a barrier in between those instances, you can help save some folks' lives. So those are just two of the ways that you can help make a real and substantive impact on reducing gun violence.
Okay, so let me just play devil's advocate here. So Fox News would immediately say, well, people can also murder other people with an axe or with a knife, and you can take many pills, and there are other ways to do these things. So why do we not have axe control? So
I mean,
let's just an even response. Like,
the fact that you laugh as you say that just shows how ridiculous that argument actually is. But when you look at the states that have universal background checks, you have 48% fewer gun suicides, you have 46% fewer women that are shot and killed by a former or current intimate partner, and you have 48% fewer police officers that are shot and killed. Those are real, tangible numbers that show this kind of legislation can actually work. When folks bring up arguments about, well, what about rope, what about pills, what about axes and all that, well, all they're trying to do is deflect away from the argument so we don't have to talk about it. They have no interest in actually wanting to solve the problem, because I think some people are of the mindset that we need to have guns for everybody all the time, no matter what. And I mean, I don't think any reasonable person, including the majority of gun owners, actually believe that.
No. That has been the experience I have had as I've traveled along the Bernie Sanders campaign, is finding more and more gun owners who keep saying, I don't care. Let's have some. He's not coming for my guns. Obama is not coming for my guns. Bernie is not. Can we please just agree not to have it be the OK Corral in the streets of America?
Sorry, I didn't plan on hopping in here.
They have a lot more.
Khary, if I could just real quickly. I happen to actually be a gun owner, so I felt obliged to opine on this particular part, and that I think you guys are totally right in that I may be a more liberal of my shooting friends when I go out or whatever. I shoot for hobby and a bit of sport, and so like mostly just clay though, so. It's registration, or not so much. I mean, there's some craziness around registration, but particularly around making sure that people some times and background checks, universal background checks, that we all agree on. Even the most far right leaning of my friends in that crowd, we all agree on that. So it is astonishing to me that we can see how unable we are to make that change despite its resounding support.
Right. So, right. And in my case, so I don't, I no longer own a gun, but I do have a concealed carry permit that I got in 2012. Excuse me. So I mean, and I respect the Second Amendment. I absolutely do. But that doesn't mean that it's without some level of making sure that we can keep folks safe without saying, hey, everybody needs to have a gun all the time without any kind of background check. That doesn't make our communities safer. And I think that's what folks are demanding, that we find ways, not only find ways to make our community safer, but find ways to do it together. And you know, when I talk about gun violence prevention, I don't do it in a way to try to demonize those who may be deemed my opposition. We need a clear path on solving this problem, and it's going to require non-gun owners, gun owners, hunters, sportsmen, Democrats, Republicans, I mean, everybody to come together. And you can, as I stated, you know, when you have more than 90% of Americans wanting it so far, I mean, The fact that we haven't is to me, a damn near a crime. But I mean, if we fail to listen to each other and want to engage in just simply yelling at each other rather than solving the problem, more people will die, and I'm not okay with that.